So welcome. Thank you for joining this session. To set the scene, for the purpose of this session, we are exploring the opportunities for the Climate Champions team and Philanthropy to collaborate more closely together and what that looks like in the long run. And we'll be sharing with you today our Climate Champions 2 campaigns, the Race to Resilience and Race to Zero. The second question we're exploring is how we can map out existing ideas and brainstorm new ones for raising ambition in climate philanthropy in the lead up to international climate negotiations. And we know that COP27 is around the corner, but we're hoping to use this session to also think about COP28 and the role of philanthropy in the international climate action space. We have 3 keynote speakers who I will be passing over to shortly from Wings and PHILEA to begin with. Then we have Climate Champions, and then finally Sonia Medina from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. We'll then be moving into breakout rooms where we can have some deeper discussions in smaller groups, and those will be facilitated around climate philanthropy and what that might look like in the future. Finally, we'll come back together and report back, and Alice from Wings will suggest some next steps. So without further ado, I know we've still got people joining, and welcome if you are joining this call. But to kick us off and make sure we make the most of this time, I'll now pass over to Alice, who many of you would have met from Wings. Thanks, Alice.
Hello, thanks very much, Tessa, for your warm welcome. Thanks very much for everybody for being here, joining us today. It's a great pleasure for us to explore this partnership with the UNFCC Climate Champions, with PHILEA, in our constant efforts to expand the role of philanthropy in the climate international spaces. I will share this effort of kind of trying to set the scene and give a bit of context of where we are in the terms of the climate philanthropy debates and landscape. With Caroline.
É muito engraçado que a gente troca em inglês, às vezes eu chamo de Alice.
Oh, there is someone unmuted there, so I'll just ask everybody to mute for a while. We'll have a moment for Q&A afterwards, so, or also can use the chat. So just to kickstart, please, Natalia, can you please share some slides, and we'll have a Q&A moment right after Sonia's speech. So, and I'm also, of course, more than welcome to clarify any other questions in the end and in the breakout rooms. So, yeah, please go ahead to the next slide, please. So, for those who don't know yet, Wings is a global community of thought leaders and change makers who are committed to ensuring philanthropy reaches its fullest potential as a catalyst for social progress. Wings has not been working on climate issues for a long time, but it has perceived the need based on some members' demands and in the philanthropic space to embrace the climate agenda, not only as a theme in itself, but actually as a threat and an opportunity for philanthropic activity in different ways. So we currently have 196 members among philanthropic associations, networks, support organizations, and academics specialized in philanthropy, like Anne Monnier here with us. And we are spread across 59 countries. We host the International Philanthropy Commitment on Climate Change, which I'll tell you a bit more in a minute. Natalia, please. So the climate philanthropy landscape, it's quite complex, it's changing quite fast, and it can be understood and analyzed through different lenses. But for the sake of today's conversation, I just wanted to bring 3 specific challenges, which are not small, but that somehow I feel they summarize some of the big elements why we need to talk about this, why we need to, as a philanthropic support organization be closer to UNFCC, to the global climate agenda, and why there are opportunities ahead to engage further. So let's go to the first challenge, please. Challenge number one is that there are not enough philanthropic resources going to climate. I think that's no big news. Everybody probably that is here has already seen that the number, the 2% that it's going to be appear now. Natalia, please, the next one. But this is an important element or starting point of this conversation. So I know that ClimateWorks report doesn't cover all the climate funding, that philanthropic funding that there is out there, but I thank very much, and I don't know if there's someone from ClimateWorks here, but I thank very much ClimateWorks for putting this number out there, because it helps a lot us in our advocacy efforts towards different philanthropies. But this number is just part of that story, right? So it talks about just a smaller number of philanthropic institutions in terms of data, and it talks only about climate mitigation, which is also a big, let's say, element of our conversation today, when we're going to hear about race to resilience and race to zero, that are have different dynamics that overlaps sometimes, but they are very different, and the philanthropic world divides itself according to different approaches, very different. So in one hand, we have a lot to grow, but we are seeing a steady growth. So the same report shows that from 2015, when we had the Paris Agreement, until 2020, this same pot of resources grew from $900 million to $1.9 billion. And this is, we are just talking about leading foundations working with climate focused programs. I'm highlighting this here because much of what we use or we understand as the climate philanthropic resources is actually looking into some of the key players in the space and not what's happening out there, for instance, in the philanthropy for climate movement. So to address this specific challenge, how to grow this pot of resources, there are several tailor-made approaches that are particularly focusing on major donors. So to strategically increase and better allocate those resources. So CLI, active philanthropy, impatient earth, I'm sure you know, if not all, many of those players, but have been looking pretty much on specific, supporting specific funders. But what about the rest? How can we make this space much more diverse and bring other foundations to this conversation? Which takes us to the next point. Natalia, please. So the case I wanted to make here is that the potential for philanthropy to actually contribute to climate, it's much larger than that. So this data from the Global Philanthropy Report from Harvard University shows that 260,000 foundations, they mapped 260,000 foundations in 38 countries. We know from WINGS that this number is not capturing the full picture of that. It's very much still focused on United States and Europe. But it's still, we are talking about 1.5 trillion, just based on this sample, 1.5 trillion US dollars, which is much more than we just saw in the ClimateWorks data. Just bringing another reference to you, CAP's data shows that Chinese foundations alone moved from 3,000 to 8,000 from 2012 to 2009. This is not fully captured here. So this sector is growing and it's not currently prioritizing climate overall. Next one, please, Natalia. So which brings us to the second challenge. So where are the climate philanthropy resources going and what social benefits they are generating? This is a big question mark that I'm sure we're going to discuss this more in detail in the breakout rooms. But we do have a tension in this space, which goes all the way to the climate conversation on global north and global south as well. But it has new faces or new ways of approaching. And Natalia, can you please change this? And I'm bringing two other interesting reference from WINGS members that try to address these issues. one of the key evidence that we have is that most of grants supporting climate change mitigation in Europe, for instance, are very concentrated in just 10 countries and mostly in Western Europe. This is like a spin-off of the bigger Climate Works report, but it's actually reflects the landscape overall. And this is actually creating a lot of questions, especially in global South countries, that sees the climate philanthropy as a Western agenda. And indeed, if we look at the traditional climate foundations, most of them are still in Europe and in the US. So how can we change this scenario? How can we bring new global South voices to this space? And how can we give more visibility to that? This is part of this challenge that WINGS is addressing, and many other here in the group, in this room today. So as we move from the quantity of climate philanthropy that is out there to the quality of climate philanthropy, questions start to emerge also on what is being funded, who is being funded, and which kind of projects are the priorities. So Edge Funders, which is also here, thanks to Martina to be here, published recently the Beyond 2%, which pretty much goes to the heart of the differentiation of what is traditional climate philanthropy to what is climate justice philanthropy, and actually bringing some productive questions on to what extent are really climate foundations, they tend to prioritize market-centered approaches and mitigation-led approaches rather than looking into longer-term structural changes. I think there is not necessarily one right or wrong. There is room for different approaches, and we need them all together to tackle the crisis. But the fact that we need to discuss this and to understand better what exactly are we talking about when we want to grow the climate philanthropy landscape. I think in the end of the day, we all agree that there can be no success low carbon transition without social and economic justice. And to understand what social and economic justice, we need to bring new voices and people who have been working on that space. For instance, many climate funders not climate funders, but many foundations and philanthropies working on education, on social inclusion, on health, on many other areas that don't know anything about climate sometimes, but that can bring pretty much these new lenses to this conversation. Which takes us to the last challenge, please, which is this. The urgency, the nature, and the scale of the problem can feel overwhelming for non-climate funders to engage. We are hearing this in different spaces from different funders, and this is one of the challenges that the climate community not often is really embracing and not really facilitating the entry of these new funders. And we want to change that. And this event and this collaboration with the Climate Champions is one of the ways we are trying to do this. So if you can move to the next, Natalia, please. There are other WINGS members have been publishing and trying to address this issue of the scale and how to open the doors, let's say, for new funders. So this publication from CEP, focusing in the US, Much Alarm and Less Action, is very interesting. And it touches upon some challenges that usually we overlook when we talk about climate pledges towards COPs, for instance. One of them is that, like, one of the barriers for entry, let's say, is that many foundations say that their mission is just not coherent with climate. So they can't do that unless their board is actually willing to change their approach or willing to embrace that. And then we go to the next challenge, which is the fact that many board members are not interested or even willing to embrace the challenge. And then we have the last challenge for especially looking into education, health funders. So the problem is too big. What can I do for that? What is my contribution to this? So Candid and Ariadne, for instance, started to tap into this by publishing this also very good report on facilitating these funders to think of climate justice work, how they can instead of becoming climate funders, integrate climate justice lens to their own grant-making portfolios. And starting small, but having clear opportunities ahead. I'm moving to the end, but Natalia, please, the next one. So this is precisely where the Philanthropy for Climate comes in. We are a global movement of foundations and philanthropy support organizations committed to taking urgent action on climate change. Most of the foundations of the movement are not climate or environmental funders. Natalia, if you can put the next one. So at the moment, we have 580 foundations that have already committed to act on climate. They are distributed across 19 countries. Some countries we have national commitment hosts, like in France, we have Beatrice here. But in other places, we have just one foundation willing to embrace this cause and look holistically for philanthropy activity and how that all the assets, all the skills, all the capacity can be used to tackle the climate emergency. Next one, please. So we are looking into different elements, and I'll skip this, but this is important for you to have that for later. You can use it and look at this later. But we are looking from all the way from educating staff and board members to actually decarbonizing your endowments, to making the transparent their actions and moving forward. So it's very much a movement looking into non-traditional climate funders who currently don't know or don't follow UNFCC negotiations and who find sometimes very hard to engage on mitigation conversations overall. So my last slide, just to summarize, this is one. The usual climate philanthropy narratives are not capturing this specific climate work of non-climate philanthropies. So we need to enlarge this conversation. We need to open those doors for those funders that are not, cannot communicate based on GHG emissions reductions, for instance, but that are willing to engage. Second, so if we want them to be, if we want to enlarge this, not only with major donors, but bringing all the sector, all the capacity and potential of the sector in, we need to help and facilitate their participation. So that's Race to Resilience and Race to Zero can be actually a very powerful tool for that. Third, identity matters. So sometimes we push too much on foundations to be, you need to become a climate funder, but not necessarily. So new funders want to embrace climate, but they still want to be funding education, health, arts, sports, name it. As long as they can contribute to climate emergency, that's fine. So we need to bear that in mind whenever we want to bring other people in. Fourth, Global South philanthropy is growing. The climate interest is growing, but they're still not visible. How can we make them more visible? And last, if we want to talk about scale, philanthropy support organizations are key players on that. And with that, I will pass on to Carolyn to conclude.
Thank you, Alice. It's great to see so many of you here. I'm Carolyn and I work for PHILEA, the Philanthropy Europe Association. And we bring together a joint membership of 200 direct foundation members working in Europe, and then also 25 also philanthropy infrastructure organizations, which is what I'm going to talk about now. And through that, we're in a unique position to mobilize philanthropy on the climate topic, and we do that through our European Philanthropy Coalition for Climate. And I'm going to tell you about this mapping that you should be able to see on your screen that focuses on the infrastructure organizations and networks that are active on climate in Europe. And the aim of the mapping was to highlight the role of philanthropy infrastructure, but also these infrastructure organizations and networks might not necessarily know each other, be familiar with each other's work, even though we're working in the same space on a similar topic. So it's also accompanied by a peer group of that brings together many of these networks. So we talk to each other regularly. And the reason that we are quite keen to work closely with other networks is that we think that through their reach and their members, they're also in a good position to activate the breadth and diversity of the European and beyond the philanthropy ecosystem, and through that to accelerate climate action on a bigger scale. And so what we saw, so this is the second iteration of the mapping that we've done. And what we've seen is there's a growing number of networks that have embraced this mission of supporting and developing the philanthropy ecosystem when it comes to climate, but there's also a growing diversity. So there's you can see on this image that there's some networks and infrastructure organizations that work purely on climate, for example, Climate Works, or the Climate Leadership Initiative or Active Philanthropy. There's also some thematic networks like Ariadne that work on human rights, but then on the intersection between human rights and climate. And then there's also a lot of general networks like PHILEA, like the national associations, including the ones that host national commitments, and networks of foundations, of particular types of foundations like ECFI, the Community Foundation Initiative. There's some geographic concentration. So for example, I don't think it will surprise you that a lot of the national networks are based in the UK. And there's quite a diversity in terms of the objectives of these infrastructure organizations, as well in terms of the activities that they run. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Wings and PHILEA, Carolyn and Alice. That was really informative and interesting. I'm now moving on to two wonderful people in my team in Climate Champions, Lisa Larson and Rama Fernandez, to give an overview to those on this call around who Climate Champions are and some work we're doing in this space. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Tessa. Just checking, can you all hear me? That's great. So I'm dialing in from North London. Very nice to see you all on the call, and thank you very much for taking this time. I'm the Director of Operations within the Climate Champions team, and I'll tell you just a little bit about who we are and what we do, and then I'll hand over to Rama to tell you a bit more about our campaign activity itself. So if you go to the next slide, and Talia, please. Climate change and the climate emergency is, of course, closely interlinked with all other challenges facing our society and way of life, regardless of where we live and work and play. And they're linked to the challenges that, of course, all of you are playing an amazing part in your focus on, so health, economic well-being, employment, education, housing, and so on. To address this crisis of climate change, we need, because of the sort of interrelated nature and the complexity of this, we need concerted efforts at a systemic level, with governments, with the economy, with society at large, working together, collaborating to deliver this change we need at pace and, really importantly, at real scale. And this was what the parties under the UN agreed back in 2015 with the Paris Agreement at COP21, to work together to limit the global temperature increases to well below 2 degrees, ideally 1.5 degrees Celsius. For those of you not familiar with the process under UN, just to clarify, the COP is an annual conference of parties, and it's the drumbeat of the UN's process for addressing the crisis of climate change and delivering on the goal of the Paris Agreement. At COP21, in addition to signing the Paris Agreement, the parties also decided to establish a new function, the so-called high-level champions, to work with governments to deliver on the goal of the agreement. the high-level champions, they're responsible for mobilizing all non-state actors. And by that, we mean businesses, cities and regions, society, not-for-profit groups and communities more broadly. At any given time, there are 2 high-level champions, and they're appointed directly by the countries that are hosting the COP. So for the moment, our bosses are Nigel Topping, the high-level champions from the UK, who was the host for COP26, and Mahmoud Muhildin, the host for COP27. So the climate champions team that we are working in is set up to help mobilize the non-state actors and accelerate change. We are a relatively new team set up about 2.5 years ago in a response to an instruction from parties at COP25 to enhance ambition and basically move faster to deliver on the goals. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense of how we work within the Climate Champions team, we utilize the unique mandate of the high-level champions to convene, accelerate, and amplify all the great work that's already going on in the real economy and at regional and city level. In a sense, you could say we are building a bit of a superhighway for climate action to ensure that everyone moves in the same direction and can ride in each other's slipstream, if you like, to move faster. And so we do our work by engaging with non-state actors and running a number of campaigns. And we then use our unique positions in the ecosystem as a formal bridge between national governments and non-state actors to raise the bar on both sides of what we call the ambition loop. So that businesses, for example, they are spurred on and enabled by new legislation and policy, and in turn governments are influenced by the real change that's happening in the real economy. Next slide, please. Our core campaigns, which Rama will tell you about in just a second, covers 3 pillars really: adaptation and resilience, with our Race to Resilience campaign seeking to strengthen resilience for those most vulnerable to climate change; mitigation with the Race to Zero campaign seeking to shift our systems and economy to halve emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero by 2050. And finally, finance with the not so aptly or clearly named GFANS campaign that seeks to shift finance streams and investment to then finance the transition. Great. Next slide, please. So basically, we've worked in quite entrepreneurial ways to set up the Climate Champions team. So we are not funded by the UN or by individual governments. We have sought the connections with businesses, with philanthropy, with not-for-profit partners to essentially build this coalition of change leaders. And so in that sense, it's very much an initiative, a team for non-state actors, but it's also by non-state actors themselves. And so we really do rely on the support from philanthropy, from businesses, from the society at large to deliver on our work. And so you can see here those that have directly supported and sponsored our work. And I should say the support is not purely financial or even pro bono support, which we get a lot of. The actual value is, of course, in building this broader coalition of change leaders that are helping us to deliver on this goal. And that's why it is so exciting to see you all leaning in and having an interest, and why it's so valuable that the wider philanthropic community supports in the ways they can and lean into this area of work. I'll now hand over to you, Rama, to dive into the campaigns a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for this. And let me start thanking Wings and PHILEA for setting up this session with all of you. I had the privilege to, before joining the Climate Champions team, work for more than 20 years at Avina Foundation with my former colleague and close friend Paula Ellinger is here in the call today. And together we had the chance to engage Avina into climate work for more than 10 years. So I really empathize with many of you and the challenges and the opportunities that we can see when engaging into climate. So what I'm going to do now is to share with you briefly how we are seeing and how we are from the role that Lisa very well shared with you of the Climate Champions team and the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions. How are we trying to sort of address this need of urgency and scale on such a complex challenge like it is the climate crisis, providing some sort of simplicity and promoting convergence and alignment between what we call the non-state actors community.
You've just gone on mute, Rama.
Sorry about that. I was trying to change the slide and I mute myself. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thanks. For this, we start with the Race to Resilience campaign. This is, as Lisa showed before, this is a global campaign that the High-Level Champions launched to try to connect and converge non-state actors all around the world to address the climate crisis from the adaptation and resilience challenge mostly. Then we'll talk about the mitigation, but I really wanted to start here because I think this speaks very much to many of the areas and concerns that your foundations are already working on. The science tells us, the IPCC told us that even if we will reach the ambitious goal of keeping global temperature under 1.5 degree world, we will have 4 billion people that will be under severe climate risk by 2030. This is in 8 years. So these 4 billion people, the analysis shows us that they will be exposed to extreme heats, to drought, to urban water stress. They will be exposed to flooding as the major 4 climate threats that we have identified. The IPCC shows us in the latest report a few more there, but you can simplify reality into this. So this is what it's telling us. The underlying message here it is what we already know, that the climate crisis, it is a climate threat multiplier that put under risk and undermines many of the other SDGs that we have. So if you're working on poverty alleviation, food security, water security, energy security, education, housing, all those goals that your foundation is already working on, they could be undermined due to a climate crisis. So that's why we believe it is critical to really embrace and integrate solutions on adaptation and resilience in the way that Alice was very well showing on before, on how foundations can structurally engage into these challenges and process. For this, Race to Resilience, it is our easier solution to drive into this challenge on the way forward. So next slide, please. So what is Race to Resilience doing to address this vision? And we are connecting and engaging non-state actors and global initiatives with the global goal of catalyze action to protect 4 billion people by 2030. We're putting people and nature at the center of the climate crisis challenge. We are connecting which are the key right solutions, the most effective solutions to protect these 4 billion people against these main climate hazards, and connecting with these global initiatives, asking them to commit with us toward this shared goal, commit to report progress under a shared metric and methodology. And we know and we are convinced that by doing so, we are also contributing to the global process. Not sure many of you are aware of this, but under the negotiations on climate change under United Nations and the UNFCC, 195 countries are currently negotiating about what a shared global goal on adaptation could be. So from our side, with this campaign, we are suggesting one potential option of how this global goal on adaptation can be seen. And we're also sharing this with a metric framework on how to do this. So please move into the next slide for doing so. So that's how we already have 34 initiatives committed to work with us under Race to Resilience. Each of these initiatives collectively, they have more than 1,700 members working on this initiative. So really trying to link the very local grassroots work that is needed to address these climate solutions with a global coalition and platform that can converge and connect with the UNFCC process there. We have a group, methodological advisory group of experts that help us to refine this metric framework and a shared methodology. And we're working with the initiatives that we're starting to report on progress to these initiatives. We just launched the shared report with Race to Resilience and Race to Zero, and you could see some more detailed information and specific and concrete case studies into that. Together, we already have a shared goal, these 34 initiatives that committed to protect 2.4 billion people. So we still need to get to connect and have much more partners and members joining the campaign. I think we are already covering more than 116 countries, if I'm not wrong. This I can correct me here. And you will see there is real global coverage there in all regions in the world, very well distributed in the case of Race to Resilience. And we are providing solutions focusing 3 key communities in rural areas, urban areas, and coastal communities, and driving clear solutions into these 3 main areas. So this is the role of Race to Resilience. Can you go to the next slide, please? So you can see some of the partners that we're working on here. You will see there very different initiatives and type of partners. Some of them are business partners, like the One Planet Business for Biodiversity partner, hosted by the World Business Council, which is really driving solutions to protect nature that reflects in protecting people with the business communities. Others, the Ocean Risk and Resilience Action Alliance, working to restore coral reef and many other sort of nature-based solutions, ocean risks that will reduce the climate hazard and exposure of vulnerable communities for local fishermen and local communities exposed to increased ocean level risk. Sorry, I forgot the name there. But from there to insurance development for risk early informed early action partnership, enhancing early warning systems globally with local actors and national actors in many areas. So you can see a diverse type of partners which we're working on to drive these solutions and accelerate this transition. The Just Right transition, the Global Resilient Partnership as key partners there. So these are the partners which we're working on. And then next slide, and I think with this, we move into Race to Zero. So just to finalize here on Race to Resilience, the aim of this global campaign, it is to convene and converge all these non-state actors. On Race to Zero, which is the campaign related to mitigation, global campaign there, if you can move to the next slide, on how we can convene and connect non-state actors working all around the world to reduce their emissions substantially with the goal of reaching net zero as soon as possible and committing to support global half of emissions by 2030, which is what the science is telling us that we need. Race to Zero had played a critical role. It was launched in June 2020, in the middle of the global pandemic, in the middle of the major economic crisis of the last century. And our goal there was to connect businesses, regions, cities, financial institutions, healthcare organizations, and education institutions, committed to this common and shared goal of net zero. In a little bit more than 2 years, it has grown more than 10 times from the moment it was launched. Today, we have over 11,000 members committed to this shared goal. that together will represent 50% of the global economy, 11% of total CO2 emissions, and we're addressing 1 billion people all over the world committed to address shared goal. This campaign, it is our response to the challenge on mitigation that Alice was referring at the opening. And it has played a critical role on making net zero the global standard for really committing towards on mitigation. As we did with Race to Resilience, we also have an expert peer review group that is independent expert peer review group hosted by Oxford University and co-chaired by Oxford University and Avina Foundation to help us define and structure what a robust criteria towards net zero means. So we work around the 4 P's here, 5 P's now, which is have a pledge, have a plan, transition plan to work in this area, have a proceed, take action immediately, publish, commit to report periodically on the progress that you're making. And we recently added a 5P, which is persuade, aiming to have alignment on the policy, lobby, and advocacy work that all these non-state actors do with their climate goals and climate targets. This campaign is playing a critical role in convening and connecting non-state actors globally on net zero. Can we go to the next slide, please? And we are working on this campaign with major partners. You can see there the Business Ambition 1.5, which is a partnership between UN Global Compact, Women Business, and the Science Based Target Initiative. There's a Cities Race to Zero initiative that convenes PHILEA, C40, the Global Convened of Mayors, and many other national partners. There's some national chapters of the Japan Climate Initiative, the Climate Pledge, which is an initiative hosted by Global Optimism from Christiana Figueres and Amazon, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, Healthcare Without Harm, to convene more than 65 institutions representing more than 1,200 national healthcare organizations, healthcare hospitals, and healthcare centers around the world. So you can see a broad range and diverse membership and actors joining this Race to Zero global campaign to this shared goal and community working with us. And the next slide, please. And as you can see, we have already connected close direction relations with the Secretary General, with he called for this sort of concern and credibility gap on the net zero commitments all around the world that has spread all over the world, and reinforcing Race to Zero as a global campaign that is helping to reduce this gap on credibility and helping the work forward. We're closely working with an high-level expert group that the Secretary General convened in Glasgow, chaired by Catherine McKenna, former Minister of Environment of Canada, and providing and sharing all the contributions that we're doing, this criteria and this robustness on the Race to Zero with this high-level expert group and working closely with all of them. So these are the 2 global campaigns. This is a way to, as I said at the opening, trying to simplify the complexity of how to engage on the climate crisis, connecting local action with global narratives and global engagements in a way that can connect and simplify how to engage into this process on the way forward. I'm aware through Wings and PHILEA that many of you are seeing next COP in Africa as an opportunity to engage and connect more, understand more how to engage with these climate crisis challenges. This COP, this African COP, is going to really focus and show a lot of emphasis on adaptation, about this holistic approach and how you can connect the climate crisis with a more systemic challenges that we are facing and all other SDGs. And hopefully we should also see some strong commitments coming on climate finance. So I really encourage all this philanthropic community to come to Race to the COP27 in Africa and show your commitment or engagement also into climate with a substantive commitment from the philanthropic community, which is very much needed, I would say. With this, I will stop and we'll look forward to have more detailed engagement with you on the breakouts.
Thank you so much, Rama and Lisa. Always fantastic to hear from you, and thank you for that wonderful overview. I'm now going to pass over to our final keynote speaker, Sonia Medina from the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Sonia is the Executive Director of the Climate Change Portfolio, which includes work in energy, decarbonisation, cities, air quality, and land use, and much more. So I'll pass over to you, Sonia, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, firstly, thank you to you and to all of the team at WINS, PHILEA, and the Climate Champions team for inviting me and for hosting such an important conversation. It's really a delight to be here with all of you. As we have already heard, the scope for philanthropy to do more on climate change is very strong. And whatever your starting point or your main focus as a foundation, we have heard loud and clear, and you know from what you see every day, that there is an urgent need to act, and it is an urgent need to act that is it is louder than it has ever been. And philanthropy has a very important and catalytic role to play. We are the most flexible source of funding for society. And we have the independence that governments and corporations don't have. We can take a long-term view that others don't have the luxury of taking, and we really do have the resources to fund things that others will find it difficult. So we truly can push for greater ambition with a very particular focus and very complementary to other actors in society. And I think it is really important that philanthropy does embrace that opportunity and that role that we do have. For those of you that don't know much about the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, I love Alice's earlier point about identity is important, and you don't have to become a climate funder. In the community, we are known as a climate funder, but actually, we are a children's funder. We were founded 20 years ago. Children remain on our name, and frankly remains a key focus of everything that we do, and everything and how we look at issues and how we actually approach our climate programming. From a budget perspective, our portfolio roughly is split into two parts. Firstly, we have, as I said, more direct work on children's issues and young people, working on child health and development, sexual and reproductive health and rights, equality for girls, and child protection. And those are critical issues that we are absolutely determined and absolutely committed to funding. And the other half is climate, because we do believe and firmly believe that climate change is the biggest threat to children today and in the future. And therefore, we have to become an environmentalist if we are to help people escape poverty, and in particular children. Rama told us about the 4 billion people already exposed to climate change risk. That's absolutely right. According to UNICEF, 1 billion children live in extremely high risk for climate change. That is half of the world's children. Half of the world's children are already exposed to very high risk of climate change. This is an urgent crisis of immense proportions. Our funder, Chris Hahn, he is extremely involved and very active, and it is a privilege to work with him. He always tells us that we are here to solve problems and not just give grants. And that is what drives us all, and it has been for the last 12 years of working on climate, as the last 20 years of being Children's Foundation. So just to connect it with the conversation that we are having about COPs, Conference of the Parties, the meetings that very soon will take place in Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27 as it's called. My first COP was COP9, so it really makes me feel very old. And a lot has changed and a lot has been achieved, even if sometimes those meetings feel slightly disappointing and moving at glacial pace. I can assure you that with the perspective of years in this these meetings are really important, and they do make a big difference, and we do make progress when we come together as a community on them. So, and we have proved that philanthropy can play and has a very important role to play in these international moments. For example, philanthropy was absolutely instrumental in really underpinning the work of civil society around COP21 in Paris in 2015 that resulted in that historic agreement. I am certain that without Philanthropic's involvement in Paris, we will not have the Paris Agreement in place. I am certain, 100% of it. I am also certain that in COP26 in Glasgow last year, where we saw several new commitments coming to the fore, just to pick one, which is extremely valuable from a greenhouse perspective. 121 countries committed collectively to reduce methane emissions by 30% this decade. That methane in particular is a super greenhouse gas, as we call it. It has a short-term pollutant that is warming the atmosphere very fast. So reducing methane emissions gives us time to reduce the absolute emissions on a CO2 equivalent basis. So hugely valuable for us and for those children at risk today. And there are several interests that the philanthropic community and the civil society community has for COP27. We have great hopes for that meeting. We have heard from Lisa and Rama some of what those objectives are, and the relentless work that the community is doing, and that we want to. It is really important that becomes truly an Africa COP, and it is known for that. We want to build and foster trust and create effective multilateral space. We know that around the world, multilateralism is under threat. So these moments of coming together and constructively building and rebuilding that trust are extremely important and very, very valuable. We want to see greater accountability and transparency, and obviously bolder moves on international private and public climate finance. This is a recurrent theme, and one that we continue to struggle a bit around, but I am actually quite hopeful that in COP27 we can see real progress there. But again, we cannot make progress on trust and accountability or transparency or financing or trust building truly without philanthropy stepping in and providing those resources for our civil society groups. I think COP27 also should be the year, should be the moment, the COP, where we really create a much firmer step towards addressing loss and damage as a topic. It is absolutely crucial for the long-term functionality and legitimacy of the Framework Convention on Climate Change that we do take that framework and start putting resources behind it. In COP26, there was an initial agreement that's CIF with other philanthropies and some governments of starting to funding a loss and damage fund. That has to become more crystallized in far greater numbers and clarity in COP27, and it's absolutely important that it is done so in the Africa COP. It will be very telling of the commitment of the community to do that, because at this COP we need to demonstrate that we do see this challenge as a climate mitigation challenge, but also as a resilience and an adaptation challenge, and that it is a holistic challenge. Warming is unstoppable. The best that we can hope for is that we limit 1.5 degrees of warming. That already is going to bring significant impacts. We have already warmed up 1.2 degrees, and we can see it's already too much for many parts of the world. So adaptation and resilience is inescapable, but mitigation is inescapable because we continue to warm up, clearly. So enhancing the trust of the Global South in this topic will be critical. And just to conclude, in terms of concrete work in COP27, for those of you that are going to be in Sharm el-Sheikh, I would like to invite you to join the community in the first youth pavilion with UNICEF and the high-level champions. Rama and Lisa didn't mention that, but we're very excited about that collaboration. I think it's going to be absolutely fantastic. The COP27 should also be the youth, COP. As we know, the continent, the African continent, is the most youthful continent in the world. So it is totally appropriate that, again, that we celebrate that, and we give them the platform, the agency to make their voices heard, because it's not only, you know, their planet that they're inheriting, but it is their future, and they have so much to contribute, so many thoughts, and they should have the ability to mention that, and to shape it as they see fit. So please do join if you come over. And on that, you know, to finish on a good note around collaboration, I really like Rama's quote from the UNSG that we all need to get on board, and I really think so, because we are a small community, as we heard from Alice. We are a small community, but we know that we can achieve so much more when we work together. And initiatives and discussions like this one, organizations like PHILEA, WINS, and others that bring us together, they're hugely valuable, because we can achieve so much more, and we can make ourselves greater than the sum of our parts. And we absolutely need to do that if we are going to win, because this is so big and overwhelming. But at the same time, progress is very tangible in so many ways, and I have given a couple of examples. So I encourage you to engage in the debate, find ways to do more together, move at pace, and that pace that matches the urgency of the action. And all points of view and all identities are welcome, because diversity is also a sense of our strength. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you, Sonia. I think what you said about philanthropy being there to solve problems is so true. Having worked in the space back in New Zealand, I'm just constantly in awe of the work that philanthropic organizations are driving, and the unique approach that philanthropic organizations have, which you alluded to, and just wanting to take a moment to recognize this effective multilateral space and bringing people together. And thank you to everyone for being here today. We're going to have just a couple of minutes in case anyone has any burning questions, and then to let you know we'll be heading into breakout rooms after that. But if you have any questions, please feel free, for any of our speakers, please feel free to raise your hand. Great. Well, it looks like everyone is excited to get into breakout.
I do have, I don't know why I can't get my raise hand function to work. It's Louise Driver from IPASA. It was really great to hear about the work of the climate champions. And what I wanted to understand is, if we wanted to engage with them at COP or through the work at COP, what are the opportunities? Because so I'm coming from South Africa to COP, and it would just be nice to see what opportunities there are. I mean, do we deal, Alice, with you through WINGS, or is there a way somehow, because we represent 50 foundations in South Africa, both international investing in South Africa as well as local foundations, and many are constituted also as non-profit organizations. And it'd be wonderful to have the opportunity to join what you're doing in terms of your advocacy work. So just want to know what opportunities there are. I don't know if that's what we're going to discuss further in the breakaway rooms, but yeah.
So Louise, thank you for that, and we'll be in Sharm as well, so really looking forward to the opportunity of meeting in person. I suggest that you link up with me, and then we can have a look at the High Level Champions program. Is, as you can imagine, very, very tight, but there are a few spots available for bilateral meetings, but also there are wider events that we would definitely love to see you in. So I'll just put my email in the chat so that you and others in the group have that, and I would love to hear from you and make the connections in one way or another.
Thank you, that will be wonderful.
Great.
Thanks, Lisa. That's really helpful. Any other questions? Great. We'll use this opportunity to move into the breakout rooms. We're going to be in those rooms for about 20 minutes and wrapping up at 3:30, but you will have a facilitator in the room, and I'll put on the chat right now some of the guiding questions, but looking forward to the discussions. Thank you so much. That did come around fast, Lisa, and I know we had an excellent discussion in our room. I'm conscious we are wrapping up at 3:30, so I'm going to ask each facilitator to extract one key point that came out of their breakout room, and then in a very short and snappy way, if possible, and then I'll pass over to Alice to wrap up our session. So perhaps, who am I going to put on the spot? Rama, are you happy to go first from your room?
Yes, Lourdes is going to report from our group. So please, Lourdes.
Yeah, very quickly, I think a couple of points that we were able to cover in the limited time was accessibility to information, participation, particularly from the Global South participants, and as well within the Global South, and to information and access of opportunities to attend from Indigenous peoples. The role that Philanthropy for Climate can also play as we are inviting new foundations to enter the space is critical to also give them the tools on how to get accredited to participate. Because I've had experience in this process of a couple of members that it's had like a hard time trying to figure out when to and the timing on accreditation, yet we're asking them and encouraging them to support more participation, particularly from feminist funders, to enter the climate change space and the climate justice space. So accessibility to information, and I think Amalia, you were talking about thinking about how do we structure this in the future for a conversation that perhaps is what are some of the ideas and proposals that are coming from organizations like Amalia's and mine and others that are sort of coming from different experiences on how do we make this process more accessible and rich to the experience of those who are on the front lines of fighting being impacted by climate change. And please feel free to add anything else.
Thank you, Lourdes. That's accessibility is such a key point. Carolyn, do you have a key takeaway from your room?
Yes, I think the key takeaway is that we need to continue this kind of conversation, and that a lot of foundations might not be regularly in contact with kind of UN affiliated bodies and vice versa. And so it would be great to continue this.
That's great to hear. And Lisa?
So very much echoed in our group as well. We talked about what we do as a philanthropic community and how we do it. We talked about the perhaps this being the first of a series of engagement to get the group together to really think about what the role is, whether it's advocacy, convening of others, as well as then the funding elements and what you fund, but also then how you do that and how you actually drive radical collaboration at pace that's really needed. So really rich conversation and appetite for doing more.
Well, that's always good to hear at the end of a webinar, an appetite for doing more. Just to share from our group before passing over to Alice to wrap up, one really great idea that came out of our group was around looking more at the funding models and bringing together not just philanthropy, but private public finance and philanthropic finance and what that looks like. And I know there's a potential session on this at COP, and there could be some more sessions on that topic. So that was great. We had a great discussion. And Alice, over to you to wrap us up.
Thanks a lot, Tessa. And I want to share one sentence that I got from our group, which was the benefits to engage in the global international spaces for Global South philanthropies must be higher than the burden. This means badges, access, finance, everything. So we need to think from this. It's not about a COP as a moment itself. It's all the journey that takes this to these spaces. So I hear like throughout today, we talk a lot about opportunity. So race to resilience, race to zero, the loss and damage facilities. There are several opportunities for engagement. How we can explore ways of connecting philanthropies with those opportunities. It's not meant to be today. It's something that it's a long term. And I see a lot of appetite coming out of this today. The second point is that it's going to be politically complex and contentious because we do have a very different power dynamics, financially speaking, access to decision making and all of this in this space. So we need to embrace, I think as Rama said, we need to embrace this complexity and live with that and how to navigate to this. And philanthropies sometimes are not willing to embrace the political tense issues, but if we need to deal with the fact that 4 billion people, and especially half of them children, will be under threat, we can't really move away from that struggle, let's say. And lastly, I think most of people here are actually philanthropy support, philanthropy associations that are willing to embrace this, let's say, membership engagement in a scale with very little resources. So this is actually a community that can help you do that. The climate champions, Wings, PHILEA, everybody here is actually willing to embrace this, and we need to do that together because that's definitely something that we're not gonna, any of us can solve alone. So yeah, I think there are many other things, and I see that this is something that most people really enjoyed, and we welcome, I think, on behalf of Tessa, myself, and Carolyn as organizing this, we very much welcome not only your feedback, but your ideas. How can we take this forward? We will explore opportunities ahead, but please feel very clearly invited to contribute to that because we need you all. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for the invite.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.